And now on BBC One, the Time Lords about to find out the trouble with Triffids in a new 4-part story as Doctor Who struggles to decide what's worse, mineral, vegetable, or animal. Doctor Who wears its heart on its sleeve, makes no secret of its origins, and keeps its scripts and monsters just this side of the line of copyright. The show knew it, the fans guessed it, and the papers in our alternate timeline inevitably reported it. So the BBC played on it in the publicity. The third story of season 27 has killer plants, old faces, and absolutely no shame at all. But in this alternate timeline, just how would this shameless borrowing of ideas work? Would they be able to make a success of what would turn out to be the most technically demanding story of the season? Doctor Who, Lost and Found, has a lot to say on this one, and it's not just the plants that can sting. Let's start with an admission. When I first heard Animal on release, I really didn't like it. But 14 years down the line, and with a new set of criteria to judge it against, I went into it with as open a mind as I could manage, and came away with a very different impression of things. The Big Finish version really does have, and I'll be tactful here, some rather poor performances in it which drag it down. The Lost and Found rules, though, meant that I made myself focus more on the story than anything else, and with that in mind, it's probably the most Doctor Who-like story of the season. We get a aiming to go somewhere and missing slightly justification for the TARDIS landing the crew in the story. We have Unit, Bambera style, to do the grunt work, and there are monsters for the Doctor to deal with that he wasn't expecting. Except that smeared over the top of that, we have huge dollops of decidedly non-20th century plotting as well. It's the second bootstrap paradox opening in a row. Okay, repeating plot ideas is 20th century, see season 25 for the most blatant one, but this just didn't feel right. We have the TARDIS vanishing for, as it turns out, seemingly no valid or explained reason. It's implied at the end that the Doctor wanted it to, but we never know exactly why. And the story's contribution to one of the season arcs is very, very not 1990. This puts Animal in a very difficult position to judge, because if Big Finish aren't going to play by the rules, then how am I supposed to? When we hit part 4, there may be a get-out clause we can use, though. I suspect that parts 1 and 2 would have been given quite a bit of publicity, purely because, as mentioned earlier, there's a very strong Triffids feel to them that can't be ignored. Trying to decide if this would have gone well is equally as difficult as staging the Triffid scenes through the story. The press have always had a strange relationship with the series. It's been highly useful for them on slow news days, especially in the real-world wilderness era, where a good half page could be filled up with randomly generated stories about a new Doctor Who movie where the Doctor would be played by someone wildly inappropriate. And given that the new companion Rain gets into a wetsuit later on, I suspect that the production team might well have done a deal. We'll give you pictures of Rain in a skimpy wetsuit if you give us some good publicity. So, stories about the similarities to classic literature could be padded out with the suggestions of other stories to do crossovers with. I'm sure they'd go for the obvious ones, Wizard of Oz, Robin Hood, Alice in Wonderland, that sort of thing. And yes, I suspect the ratings would have been given a boost. Cast Marek Anton as the unreliable himbo unit soldier that wants to shoot Ace as the part 1 cliffhanger, and I suspect that might have helped a bit too. But in 3 of the 4 parts there are very important plant attack scenes, and this is where the TV version would have had to make some very tough choices. Part 1 is the easiest one to deal with, and across the 25 minutes, the Big Finish version only needing a slight trim here and there to hit the mark, it's a very basic setup. It just needs a university location, which, if filmed as a real university, would potentially come with a very large and very cheap set of background extras, some generic science labs, and a solitary moving plant. This solo plant attack could probably be done with a pretty static prop, an off-screen prop guy waving a tendril around, and some cunning use of camera angles. Sadly though, this wouldn't have worked for part 2, which has the plants attacking in the greenhouse, which was the one location in this story that I struggled to visualize. I'm guessing they'd have gone for lots of plastic walls if they had to build it from scratch. For the show to survive, this really would have had to have been a showcase sequence. In the 1960s, we had plants attacking by mostly being shaken by stagehands standing off camera in The Keys of Marinus. In the 70s, we had an awful lot of leaves being pulled along on wires in The Seeds of Doom. But Animal really needed to get this right. Done well, this could be the sequence that made kids terrified of plants and put Doctor Who back on the map. The effects team would have had to throw it all into this one. I'm thinking a lot of tendrils lashing around unpredictably through cunning use of compressed air being forced through them, actors looking absolutely terrified, probably because of large numbers of tendrils lashing around unpredictably, and realistic-looking plant bodies. I'm not entirely convinced that the vaguely foam rubber-looking bits on the vervoids would have been good enough. Oh, and Rain would really have had to go for it with the axe. And hopefully they would find a way to reverse footage to make tendrils coil around people that didn't make it painfully apparent that they had reversed footage. At least in part 4 we're back to slightly more static-looking plants, but get the scare factor right in episode 2, and that might just be enough. We then hit the part 2 cliffhanger, where the story gives season 27 its first real plot twist. And the other reason why, based on the Big Finish script at least, the show really needed the plant attacks to work. Because, sorry to say this, parts 3 and 4 have issues. The spaceship, as far as the special effects department is concerned, isn't really an issue. It's just a big disc-type thing in the sky. Ace even says it's a big spaceship. So far, no problem. Then Andrew Cartmel manages in one line to really bugger things up totally. It's not even as if the line was needed in the conversion from visual to audio. Ace had already told us everything we needed to know. But no, Andrew Cartmel felt the need to give us the ship's dimensions and also the height above ground, and in doing so, has a failure of maths to match the one that Mark Platt managed to put into one of his cliffhangers in Lou Garou. We're told that it's very roughly 1 kilometre across, and it's only 100 metres off the ground. To give you an idea, imagine a disc the width of 100 houses hanging above you at the height of Big Ben. Now picture how much light you're going to get standing under it. Getting the lighting right in part 3 and 4 would have been impossible. Points of view would have been flooded with letters, because in 1990 we didn't have blue sky to moan on, we wrote in and complained. Oh, and did I mention that in part 4, this ship lands on the university playing fields? Then again, this is a university that has at least one accommodation block that's at least 19 stories high, and that students can somehow sort out getting a huge satellite dish attached on the 19th floor outside their window. Did Scobie have some kind of penthouse suite? Against the odds, let's say that they managed to get the lighting right and even managed to somehow portray a 19-story tower block consistently on the screen in long shots. Points of view would still have had a full postbag, as it turns out that the universe's most dreary aliens are called numlocks. Were they related to the scroll locks and the print screens? Critics would have had a field day. There is an art form to naming alien species. Simply looking at your keyboard and taking it off one of the keys on there is most definitely not it. There is some chance of redemption for the aliens, though. Their use of wordplay is magnificent, and with Part 3 needing to shed about 5 minutes and Part 4 needing to shed about 10, The chances are the distinctive speech patterns would be dropped as soon as the overruns were realised, and we would have maintained a decent pace to the scenes. But Andrew Cartmel still has one trick up his sleeve. Well, I say trick, it's more like one more opportunity to shoot himself in the foot, which he manages with spectacular style not once, but twice. Let's take the lesser of the two problems first. This story is set in 2001. Yes, it's possible that Rain would have used Google to look up her father, but at that stage, Google had only just edged into third place in the search engine battle. At the start of the 21st century, Yahoo was very much the search engine of choice, and one most likely to be the default. And how to put this tactfully? Big Finish's brief was, make audio versions of what Season 27 might have been. So that's Season 27, to be shown in 1990, 9 years before Google was even founded, let alone well known. Up until this point, I had actually managed to convince myself that this could have been a real set of stories. Any sense of keeping that going was absolutely shattered by these scenes. Thankfully, though, it's not a catastrophe. Remember that Part 4 is, in audio format, about 10 minutes too long to be a real television episode. Burn the Google scene out of existence, and simply have Rain staying behind to find out what had happened to her father. Keep everything else off screen, because in one of those highly fortuitous moments that normally only seem to happen in fiction, the fourth and final story in Season 27 might actually need some padding out. Animal definitely feels more like authentic television Doctor Who. I actually wish I could find out who the alternate timeline BBC cast as the student leads. And in this 21st century era of classic Who figures, I'm thinking I'd be recording this with a plant replica on my desk. Would it give me inspiration to get the next episode done? Probably not needed, as the season potentially ends on a high. If you don't know which one it is, no cheating. And definitely don't Google it. After all, it is 1990, and no one is going to aid you.